All right, Lindsey. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It's good to have you on, and thanks for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I like to generally start, as we were talking before I recorded, so I pushed the record button, is just to kind of get your background story as to your history, your interests in the kind of therapy that you provide. I would love to maybe start there and just sort of hear the background as to what brought you to this point now.
Okay. Yeah, that's quite a journey, little story to tell. I'll try to make it concise though. So I graduated, with my counseling degree and all of that back in 2003, became a fully licensed therapist by 2006. I've always been sort of drawn to alternative approaches that were sort of just on the fringe, on the edge, but I had like this kind of hunch that, oh, there's something there. I started out with EMDR, and like at the time, I think I did that. Did my first training in that in 2005. And at the time, I mean, it'd been out for a while, but it was still considered kind of fringe and like woo woo. But now it's, it's a best practice. And so I've been doing that for 15 years, and I still do EMDR. That's one therapy that has really stuck, and I believe in a lot. So then I've also like neurofeedback. I did that training a couple years later. And so, I've always been sort of I'd always been drawn to those sort of out of the balance kind of modalities. And then in 2009, I went through a divorce, and it was really painful, to say the least. And we had 2 children at the time, and so there was just a lot there. And going through that process, I picked up this book by Daniel Pinchbeck, and it was called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. And I thought it was about the Mayan prophecy of 2012, which it kind of was, but I had no idea it was about what it was truly about. I just was attracted to the book, got into it, and he just basically detailed all his experiences all over the globe about different psychedelics, which I had not considered psychedelics in my journey at that point. I had epilepsy as a child, and those kind of things just kind of scared me. And I didn't think I was a candidate. Like my mind just didn't even go there. But he, talking about the different plant medicines, he mentioned Iboga, and something about that just really resonated with me, given what I was going through. He said it was like out of all of them, it was the most difficult, but that it brought him like it really brought him the most insight into his own spiritual journey. And I was at that time entering into, my sort of dark night of the soul. So it really drew me in, and I just sort of remembered it. It was in the back of my mind. I researched it, read about it, discovered it was, being used for heroin addiction interruption. But even though I wasn't, a heroin addict, something just told me I needed to do this. And so 2 years after I first read about it, I took this class, this biology class for fun, and the professor was he's an expert in peyote. Dr. Martin Terry is his name, at Sul Ross State University in Humboldt, Alpine, Texas, which is where I lived at the time. But he's this like Harvard graduate and really amazing man, but taught at this humble university but he did that because that's where peyote, grows around there. And so, I went through this class and told him about my interest in Iboga. He encouraged me to write a paper on it, and I did. And it inspired me then to go down to find a clinic in Mexico, and I journeyed with it for 2 weeks. And that was my first psychedelic experience, was Iboga, and which is like, in Ibogaine, it was like a mixture of both. I did a little bit of Ibogaine, a little bit of Iboga. That was, and at a clinic down in near Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, in San Pancho. Wonderful couple that they were my providers, just wonderful people. Christopher and Mara, love them. Anyway, so like I didn't have any idea like the impact it would make, but like once you do something, like Iboga is it's like a family, and it just sort of pulls you in. And all of a sudden I found myself part of this global network of people that were like far exceeded my current capacity living in a small West Texas town. Yeah. And then it wasn't, it was really all at that same time. It was just not long after that, I decided to move to Austin. And so I moved to Austin, and it was about a year after that journey work in Mexico that my providers had actually reached out to me and asked me if I would provide integration therapy for an individual who had just gone through Ibogaine assisted heroin detox. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about heroin addiction, but I'll do it. I felt called. They were asking me. So of course I agreed, and I learned so much from that individual. She's amazing. To this day, I just love her. And anyway, so I did that. I was working in like conventional type therapy settings, but also doing that on the side, weaving that in, and just over the years, I knew that I needed to expand that integration therapy to a facility where people could come. And I that was on my heart for a long time. And as I lived in Austin, I got, connected into these conscious communities and things going on in Austin, like authentic relating games and circling and all these different, like really cool integral practices. And as I, kind of put it all together, and like sweat lodges, things like that, I was like, this would make an amazing aftercare program. Just like put all these things together, throw in a little therapy, some coaching, and a lot of love, and so it was in 2017. So we're going on 4 years now, that I decided to just do it. Just, I was working for, just in a conventional job at the time, miserable still, and just like, what am I doing? I was still doing some integration therapy on the side, but I didn't do that enough for it to be full time. And I decided to just jump in and do it. I mean, I had no money. I started out with no money and just a dream. And I found a house, and they just started coming. And, it was really, it was all very serendipitous. And, it's been a pretty, there's been a lot of, it's kind of a hero's journey of sorts. There's been a lot of things to face along the way, being a therapist associated with something that is a Schedule I, even though we're not administering it or anything like that. We're just providing the aftercare. It was like scary, and I had to really face some dragons and get through that process. And, and I'm just really glad that I did. So I guess, what was it, about not even a year into, it was just really just a few months into opening Root Recovery. That's the name of the aftercare. I felt this calling to go through the program at the California Institute of Integral Studies and Psychedelic Assisted Therapy and Research, just to like really, bring credibility to what we were doing. And then I was accepted. It was an awesome program. Ended up, as part of it was the MAPS therapist training course. I did that with Michael and Annie Mithofer. That really inspired me. Once I was through the program, I decided, hey, someone needs to bring expanded access, the MDMA expanded access to Austin. At the time, I didn't know there were other people that were thinking of this too. So I formed a team, got on board with Roots Behavioral Health. Dr. Turnipseed is the medical director of that. And he agreed like, hey, yeah, let's do this together. And he was also providing, was and still is a ketamine provider. And so I started doing ketamine therapy, and started getting, even more and more experience working with a psychedelic medicine that is currently legal. And that work has been amazing. And trained as well under Dr. Phil Wolfson, who is the editor of the ketamine papers in ketamine assisted therapy. Been doing that now for 2 years, and that's been amazing. Like, ketamine is just so like such an under rated medicine, and probably my hunch is because it's already legal and it's just being used, or it had been up until recently. The esketamine was FDA approved for PTSD, but but the ketamine in general, the not esketamine but R-ketamine has been used off label for the treatment resistant depression, PTSD for quite a while now. But there was a lot of resistance, in the conventional medical community. A lot of, suspicion, like, how can this really be working? But it's life-changing. It's game-changing medicine. And I stand behind it 100%. So that's my story in a nutshell. Yeah.
To go to your first experience of going to Mexico, what did you think you were walking into? I mean, it sounds like it was Iboga and Ibogaine. Would love to hear any comment you have about what those substances are, what the experience was like for you when you actually went through the ceremony.
I had no idea what I was getting into. I was so psychedelic naive at the time. I just knew that I needed some kind of shift. And so I just went with an open heart and open mind. And the experience itself, it was a little difficult for me. I was, again, I'm epileptic, and I don't really have like adult seizures the way I did as a child. I still occasionally have one here and there. But they had to be very careful with me. And so I did what is called a slow dose protocol. I didn't do this big flood dose that people that are trying to, interrupt opiate addiction do. But for me, being a highly sensitive person, the doses that I did do, they felt like what I would imagine a flood dose would feel like for someone that doesn't have my sensitivity. But I would say, I would characterize that experience for myself. It's different there's key elements that are similar between all people. I would say, it's very introspective. It's very, very deep. They call it a waking dream. So it's you're seeing you're awake but sort of dreaming, and it tends to draw up childhood memories, experiences. So it's really great for people that are struggling with addiction or post-traumatic stress disorder, because so often the root of those those issues stem from childhood experiences. And so it just kind of goes there. It just naturally goes there. People will have memories of things that they'd long forgotten, and they were just happening all over again. And you just have this sort of this objectivity there that isn't really possible without something like Ibogaine. So I would characterize as a very deep, introspective, can be a little bit frightening experience. For myself, there was a moment where I felt like I was going to die, and it's like, whoa, what's going on here? It was scary, but on the other side of that, it's like a mini hero's journey. You come out and it's bright and it's clear, and it's like, wow, my life has changed. And yeah.
How did you do when you took it? Is it something that you eat? Is it how is it administered, and how long is that waking dream that you just were talking about? How long does it last?
So it's kind of got a reputation. A flood dose, they say it lasts up to 36 hours. I would say the peak effects generally last from anywhere from like 6 to 8, 10 maybe hours. And yes, you ingest it. It's by mouth. I did all the different types, variations. I started out by eating just root bark. That was my first like initiatory dose. And I mean, just like literal shreds of little bark, it wasn't even like the powdery form of the root bark. It was kind of, you chew it up, like they do in Africa. And my provider, he has been initiated by the Bwiti in Africa, where this ceremonial, medicine, this sacramental medicine comes from. So he incorporated elements of the tradition into my experience, had a little kind of baptism of sorts, at this beautiful like area on the beach in the Pacific Ocean where we did the ceremony, went back to the house. And at first it kind of just felt like I was maybe stoned or something. It wasn't like that was my initiatory dose. And they just kind of, fed me little bits and, day by day to see how I would react. They were very careful and, very considerate of, like the fact that I do struggle with some epilepsy and things like that. So they were just really, really wonderful. And then there's other forms. There's TA, which is total alkaloid, and it's like compressed into it's like a green pill looking thing. And then there's HCl, which is the pure Ibogaine extract. And I did all three things, like all three forms of the Ibogaine. So, and the root bark has all the alkaloids, as does the TA, the total alkaloid, whereas the extract is just pure Ibogaine. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah. And,
okay.
And the difference between the two, the two substances, are they both essentially the same chemical, just coming from different places, or how are I think it was Iboga and Ibogaine. How are they differentiated?
Well, Iboga is the herb. It's the actual, like root bark, whereas Ibogaine is the pure extract, the alkaloid. Ibogaine is an alkaloid within Iboga, and that is, Ibogaine is what, it blocks opiate withdrawals and is what is used for, like these big flood doses for people that are trying to get off of opiates. So that's, it's like the pure extract. It's a little bit, it's a little bit easier maybe on the system than all the different alkaloids combined. Although I experienced the total alkaloid is the best for me. That resonated best with my system. Yeah.
And after you said that you had to fight or slay some dragons during your own experience, talk about what the after effect was for you, and what how it if it did, it changed your mind or changed your thinking. What was that experience like afterwards?
Yeah, I would call it the Ibo glow. I just, at the time, it was hard to really quantify, but people, they were like, what's changed? You're just like glowing, and, you seem so at peace. And I remember feeling, definitely more grounded. Just a sense of like, I was really struggling before. And then after, like, the struggle was still there, but it's like I had this sense of like space from it. And I wasn't so in it. I had a little bit of, I just had like this like feeling of safety from what I was going through. It just gave me the strength to continue to go through what I needed to go through, rather than just like, hide into myself.
Yeah. And after that, and you went into the chronology of kind of your life story a bit ago, but did that immediately trigger in your mind the idea that this could have wider usage, and that you as a budding therapist could potentially use something like this to help people?
I didn't really consider that myself, until, and I have never administered it to anyone else. But I didn't really consider that until my provider asked me, a year later, hey, do you want to be involved? Like, I had a sense that I was that I wanted to be involved somehow because it just felt like I got pulled into this sort of family. I just didn't know what that looked like. And I didn't even know what integration therapy was. So, that there would be a place for someone like me. But once that was presented to me, it quickly became apparent that I had something to offer. So,
That space that you were mentioning, that it sounds like it almost sort of gave you a certain buffer maybe between what the immediacy of the pain and the difficulty, and then after the experience, it became seemingly more manageable for you.
Yeah.
Did you notice that at the time, if there were other people who were also there taking a ceremony, did they also seem to have a similar type of experience and reaction?
I was actually there by myself. I didn't have anyone there with me. It was just me. I mean, there were people that were there that had gone through it, who were still there and integrating, that just kind of hung out, for months after. There was one guy in particular that comes to mind that I bonded with. And and I know he had abused heroin for years. I mean, something like 15 years. And he was definitely, I didn't see him before, but he seemed like just a normal person to me. So I imagine, he was experiencing a pretty big shift.
Yeah. And you were mentioning the phrase, I think it's integrative therapy. Is that right?
Integration therapy.
What does that mean? What is that in the therapeutic practice?
So what that really means is, like, rather than these peak experiences just being an experience that we don't learn from, it's like weaving the lessons into our lives, and how it can go from just an experience to part of the fabric of our being.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it would be sort of like a place or an environment after the experience where you could reflect on what had happened and actually integrate the experience more deeply into your future and your life on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. And without having to do it over and over again.
Yeah.
But these are master teachers. These plants are. And I believe, and many people believe, of course it's up for debate, that they have like a consciousness of their own, and that they, interact with our consciousness, and they offer like great lessons, and if you're open and you approach these plant medicines in this way, then there's so many rich layers to peel with it. And that's really the goal of, the process of integration therapy, is just like peeling the layers of the experience, and how those lessons and themes that come up can weave into your life and just make you a better, more whole person.
Yeah. So that getting back to kind of your story and how things unfolded after your first experience down in Mexico, what has led to this point now for you? It sounds like there was still some time that elapsed between when you had this experience and when you were actively involved in this type of community. How did you actually get involved in a more serious way in that community?
I just kept in communication. I just kept connected to my providers, and I felt a deep, deep sense of love for them. Like, it was like, I felt like I was like literally part of a family, and that sense just kept me connected, and they started sending me people, and that, just doing like phone integration kind of work, or coaching really is what I would call it then, due to the fact that I would, provide this, to people that weren't necessarily living here in Texas. So I couldn't really call it integration therapy. And it wasn't really therapy. It was more like integration coaching at that time, so that I could do that kind of work outside of, my license. Yeah. So that's how I got involved, is through coaching and just learning through people that, struggle with addiction. Because that wasn't my struggle. Although I had some stuff that I had gone through that was deep, equally as difficult as, addiction. And that, I think that was the piece that, these people, they could feel like, even though I wasn't a recovering heroin addict, they could feel me. There was like this connection there. I think that the common thread there is like pain, suffering. And so, and I just kept, I went back in 2015 and I volunteered at a Ibogaine clinic down in the Yucatan with Robert Payne, and he's an Ibogaine provider. I did like a little 3-week volunteer internship, if you want to call it that, or whatever you want to call it, with him, and learned that side of the medicine, and like help people through their experiences, through ceremonies. They did more like group ceremonies, more traditional Bwiti type ceremonies. So I just kept staying plugged into the community, and it wasn't too long after that I opened the aftercare, and I traveled down to Costa Rica, met some providers there, and started developing relationships, and people just started sending people my way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when they would send people your way, was it mostly, are these like telephone conversations you're having to help coach them, or what was the dynamic at that time?
Yeah. Telephone conversations.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, and then, now that like they come here, I could really do therapy with them, over the phone. It was coaching, it was integration coaching, and Being True to You is a good model for that. That's a psychedelic or transformational coaching business here in the US that is a good model for what that looks like. So, but now that, we have the space, I can actually do like real therapy with these people. And so it's a little different than what I was doing before.
I think you used the word miserable when you were talking about your prior work at one point in your career. When you were doing more, it's what sounds like traditional therapy, did you have a hunch prior to getting more involved in Ibogaine and psychedelic work that this was this huge untapped field, and that perhaps even that your patients could be benefiting from this experience, and they really weren't, or was that not necessarily something that was on your mind at that time?
I've always just been very careful about. I've never recommended Ibogaine therapy to anyone. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I've always been very mindful of that and want to protect that, because, and so, and that mindset is what's needed in this field for this second wave of psychedelic therapy to, remain intact, because we all know what happened in the 1960s. So I have never pushed Ibogaine. I've always just been like, if they come to me, then, yes. Of course, there was times where I thought, wow, this would be wonderful for them. But I've never recommended, that's just not the way to go about it, in the political climate. Yeah. And so I've just kind of gone by, kind of operated through faith that the right people will come to me, but I don't need to push this agenda.
Yeah. And when given that it's not something that you have ever pushed on anyone, in your experience, what's the description or a description of somebody that you think might be a prime candidate for benefiting from that medicine and that experience?
I think someone that is, open-minded, and that is capable of doing the work to integrate the experience, number one. So they're, they need to be fairly open-minded is a good word. And two, conventional treatment has just not worked for them, so they've tried and they've tried and they tried, and they just keep relapsing. So I think those are the two major factors, but I wouldn't recommend this to just anyone. Not everybody is a candidate for this type of therapy or that type of detox. A person really has to be ready to be clean. And Ibogaine is it's a very mind altering experience. And, if someone's like prone to psychosis or if they would be going back to an environment that's not conducive to, inner growth and healing, then it's probably not for them.
Yeah. Yeah. It is also a prerequisite in your mind that they are an addict, or are there other descriptions of people, having had trauma, having dealt with serious depression? Are there other characteristics that might also make somebody a candidate?
I think so. Definitely post-traumatic stress. Definitely people that, experience, like, I would say not so much like bipolar, because that could actually maybe trigger a manic episode. Not people with psychosis, but people with like anxiety disorders, PTSD, depression, and an addiction. They're good candidates for this.
It sounds like you've made quite a bit of relationships over the years with people who have been involved in this work for a long time. Is it your experience that in these other cultures outside of the US, these substances are woven into the fabric of these societies and have been treated as a medicine historically for a significant period of time?
In other countries?
Yeah.
There's, if you're asking about Ibogaine in particular, it's fairly new. I mean, it didn't really emerge into any kind, outside of Africa until the 1930s. And I think it was France or Germany. Yeah, it was Germany that, I think it was Germany. And my memory's is failing me on that. Maybe it was France, maybe it was Germany. But there was a medicine that was, based on Ibogaine, and it was used for depression for a short period of time in Germany. But then Ibogaine, once it made its way to the United States, it got immediately thrown into the Schedule 1, 1970, drug, act where, they scheduled marijuana, and Ibogaine was in there from the get-go. Howard Lotsoff, he was a heroin addict that, like, the way it was discovered, its addiction interruption properties were discovered by a guy named Howard Lotsoff, who took it thinking it was just like going to be a fun trip. And he, after he was laid out for 3 days, the story goes, and then he came out of that and he was like, I don't want heroin. All of a sudden, he had no cravings at all for heroin and no withdrawal symptoms. And so he started giving it to his friends, and that's how it spread, but it was shut down pretty quick. Yeah. So it hasn't been real widely accepted. There was, several attempts in the 80s at patenting it, but there's just been so much pushback from, the FDA over the years that it's never made it into the mainstream for that reason.
Yeah. I know if I'm understanding psychedelic treatment correctly, I think other substances also have been used for addiction and for heroin addiction specifically. Is it fair to say that Ibogaine is as effective, if not the most effective, known plant medicine for heroin addicts?
I would say, yeah, of the things that I know, there's also, ketamine is also showing promise in that area too, especially when it's combined with NAD, which is a type of vitamin supplementation. But I would say Ibogaine, from my current knowledge, is the most effective. And one thing, I want to go back to one thing you had asked before, people that are candidates for this, there's also, a safety profile that goes along with Ibogaine. It can be dangerous. So anyone with cardiac issues that have really, hardened livers, they would have to be screened out, because it can definitely be dangerous if it's not administered properly and to people that are true candidates for it. So they have to go through, pretty rigorous medical screening and make sure that physically you can handle it.
Yeah. For people that, let's say there's somebody listening to this who is a recovering addict or is on heroin and is interested in trying they've tried traditional options. Nothing is working. They're curious about this. What would be the first step, provided they are a candidate that would make sense to potentially take this? How would you recommend, or how would such a person go about pursuing this? Is it contacting reps in Mexico? What's the best and most suggested way in which to pursue something like this?
I would say just Google, go to the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance website and just start researching.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put anyone's specific name out there or recommend any specific providers. My biggest recommendation is just do your research, go to the gita.org and learn about it, and then just go from there.
Yeah. Do we know what is happening? Or you just mentioned this gentleman, I think in the 70s, who was a heroin user, had a 3-day experience, and then afterwards realized he didn't want heroin anymore. Do we know or have any idea what is going on in individuals for whom this is successful and they're able to face down what has to that point been an impossible addiction for them?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's, the pharmacological, the mechanism of action that's going on in the brain. It does block the opioid receptors, but then there's also the spiritual component of the experience that gives people insight into their addictive behavior. So it's kind of this two-pronged approach that, and Ibogaine is really interesting. Most psychedelics are they target very specific neurotransmitters. Ibogaine targets multiple neurotransmitter systems, not just the opiate system, but also the serotonin system, the dopamine system. I mean, it's a very unique psychedelic plant in its mechanism of action. So it's got this way of bringing people out of depression, and also blocking the withdrawals and the cravings, and also affecting their motivation in a positive way. And so it's the neurochemical profile is part of it, but the other part is the actual psycho-spiritual journey that the people go on.
Yeah, and to that story, it does sound like, and I've heard this from other people who are familiar with psychedelics, that there does seem to be, I think you used the word introspective, kind of personal history and a vividness of, and a remembrance of things that may have happened to them in their past that are up until that point just inaccessible without that kind of a substance. What do people who have those experiences tend to get revealed to them? Is it usually some sort of trauma? Is it some sort of unknown issue that they haven't up to that point been able to look square in the eye? What tend to be the experiences of that personal history?
I mean, I would say the experiences vary as much as people vary, but some common themes that I can point to are themes of just compassion and forgiveness, of self and of others. They may go into something with a parent and all of a sudden just have a new understanding of why that parent did what they did. And many people see the things that they've done, and they're able to forgive themselves and release guilt and shame, and just recognize that you don't have to keep reliving the past. It's about coming into the here and now and changing who you are now. And and then it can also there are people that also have experiences that are much more phenomenological than just their childhood things. Very some people go into past lives and all kinds of stuff. The experiences really vary. But I would say the one thing that is very, consistently present is some kind of ancestral theme, or, past life kind of ancestral theme, in childhood, the childhood themes.
I think you mentioned a little bit ago the Root Expanded Access, program in Austin. What, if you can add some color to that, what exactly is that program? What's its goal? What does it do?
Root Are you talking about Roots Behavioral Health now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I was heading up that effort to become an expanded access site. Roots Behavioral Health was partnering with basically Root Recovery to bring that to Austin. There were many other, clinic or groups in the running for that, over 100. And I think only 10 or 12, I'm not sure if I heard 10 at first, but I think maybe it's 12 now. Clinics got selected across the U.S. to actually, have that the first. More clinics may be added as the phase 3 trials. The results prove to be safe. It's all about safety. They want to make sure that they don't just grant it to all the clinics, and all of a sudden there may be an adverse event that derails all of their efforts. So, so we were hopeful and we were excited about the possibility of being chosen, but we were not part of the first, cut of clinics that were chosen for that.
The expanded access is really, if I understand, it is across the U.S. It's one of the first times in which these trials are legally sanctioned to be tested in an environment that's supervised. Right.
So MDMA expanded access is an extension of the phase 3 clinical trials, but it's granting access to the general public. A person still has to qualify the same as someone participating in the main study, at one of the main research sites. So, but the expanded access is just a way for other people that to receive, the life-saving benefits of MDMA before it's fully medically legalized. Yeah. And those people that participate in the expanded access, while they're not officially part of the study, that they're part of the safety they're part of the safety protocol. So they're not, looking at those individuals that are participating aren't official research participants, but in a sense, they just help strengthen the safety profile of the medicine. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the facility that we're sitting in and where we are right now, talk to me about how this came to be and when it started, and also who some of the people who tend to come here, their general stories, their general profiles.
Well, this is part of the Ibogaine aftercare. So this is, this isn't where our clients come. This is where some of my staff live, and this is where we office. We have coaching and sessions and things like that in here. And then we have a house down the road where people, that are part of our, that are part of the aftercare retreat, they come after they do Ibogaine in Mexico or Costa Rica or someplace where it's legal. And then they come here for typically 4 to 8 weeks, and we work with them and do all kinds of integration activities and just help them to, give them the space, going back home to a familiar environment right after Ibogaine is not a good idea. And having tools and, being able to kind of get to the root of the addiction, integrate the experience. That's what we offer here.
Yeah. What are the people who end up coming here? What are some of the themes that you notice from their life stories? Is it mostly addicts who have just gone through the treatment? Is it often other issues that they tend to want to address? What are the typical histories of the people that come?
Our main population that we serve are people recovering from heroin or fentanyl addiction, so opiate addiction. And we occasionally have, someone who maybe abused alcohol or or we've had a couple of people that were, that had PTSD that were not abusing any kind of substances, but they wanted to do ketamine assisted therapy. And so they became part of our daily kind of integration stuff. And then we take them to do ketamine therapy at Roots Behavioral Health or Illuma, which is another clinic that we work with. So yeah, but that's very few people. Most of the people, 99.9% of the people that we've worked with are recovering from opiate addiction.
When they tend to show up here after having the Ibogaine experience, are they generally euphoric? Are they confused? Are they just in need of a safe place? What's generally the state of mind of people who have just had this experience and then they show up down the street from here? What's the general description?
It really varies. It depends on what they were abusing, how long, their age. Like for example, we have someone who's very young right here, right now, and he came like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and just ready to go, and then we have someone else here that, I was just speaking currently that he's older and he's, had more, he was abusing fentanyl and it was a lot harder and it was a much harder addiction. And it took him a while, and sometimes one of the side effects of Ibogaine is that it does interrupt your sleep for a good week. And, so people have a hard time sleeping for a week to 10 days. And so they may be tired and, it's just a safe place to just like get back to normal without, getting re-triggered and using again. And it's really, by the way, like if a person's going to do Ibogaine, they don't want to relapse right away because the opiate receptors have been reset in a sense, and their tolerance is way down. And so if they were to go out and they were to use the normal, like the dosage that they had used previous to doing the Ibogaine, they could quickly overdose and die. Yeah. So it's very dangerous to do that. And so it's very important for people to have a safe place to land after Ibogaine.
And for you personally, have you left traditional therapy altogether and focus now full time on this type of work, or what's your schedule look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like the founder and I just run things, and I'm definitely doing this full time. This is my kind of like my newborn baby, more like a toddler now because we've been going for a little bit, longer. But yeah, she's a toddler, so she needs a lot of attention.
Is business good? Are you getting a lot of inquiries? Are people in need of these kind of services?
Definitely in need of it, given that we've got an opiate crisis going on. It's been a little bit challenging during COVID. We've been a little bit slower, but we're still here. We're afloat. I've got, a relatively low overhead model that I haven't taken out debt or anything like that. So sometimes we only have 2 clients and sometimes we have 3 or 4 and sometimes we have like 5. We haven't typically had more than 5 or 6 at once. It's, our max is 7 and we've never reached our max. So it's pretty small and intimate, but we like it that way. Yeah. So, but we're doing okay. I mean, we could probably, it would be nice if we had, more people consistently. COVID has definitely affected that, but we're still here.
Yeah. It just seems to me that in the US right now, there's a growing interest and movement towards more psychedelic usage, and especially usage for therapeutic purposes. When you look to the next 2 to 3 to 5 years for yourself, what's the best case scenario? How would you like to see this facility and your work evolve?
That's a good question. I'm not like I would say conventional mindset of scaling. That's not my goal. If to me, the goal is just to strengthen what we do. The quality is to, I want us to be, like having a high success rate, and we already have a pretty high success rate. But I just want to figure out what the secret sauce is to help people, like really maintain long-term recovery. That's, the sustainable recovery is what we like to call it. And we figured out a few things. One thing that's really beneficial is that people stay here in Austin, That sometimes isn't the best thing, but for those that are looking for like a new place to kind of seed and grow and cultivate a new life, like staying here and plugged into the community has been really helpful for some of our clients. And just, so even after they leave, they're still part of the family. And, so just really figuring that out. And one area where we are growing right now, like we're in the midst of it, is ketamine. And so we're really kind of diversifying, not going away from Ibogaine, but accepting people that are wanting to just come and do ketamine, and they don't even want to go do Ibogaine, because that does require going out of the country, and with all the travel restrictions and the fear and just everything going on in the collective, it's Ibogaine is just like not as accessible. So in ketamine it's great medicine, and it's also life-saving in many ways. It has, there is efficacy for addiction interruption. There's a ton of efficacy for PTSD and treatment-resistant depression. So we're focusing a lot on ketamine right now, and figuring out ways to like expand upon that.
Yeah. Are you hopeful that in time more of these drugs will become more easily? I guess I should ask: are you optimistic that in time these substances will become more accepted in the culture, and that ketamine is legal, as you mentioned, but all of these other substances that can really help people? Are you confident or optimistic that in the next few years, or maybe the next 5 years, that they'll also be possible for people to access legally in the country?
I'm not sure that Ibogaine will ever make it, because the thing about Ibogaine is there's a lot of risk factors that go along with it. But what is happening is they're developing, medicines based on Ibogaine that are safer, like pharmaceutical, FDA, approved. They're all in the, the research and testing phase right now. But there's one I think called TGH. Don't ask me what that stands for, but it's a derivative of Ibogaine, and it's, that it doesn't have like all the side effects, which, if you take away the psychedelic experience, arguably there's something that's lost there. But, there are people that then could benefit that wouldn't be good candidates for Ibogaine, that maybe they have, some psychosis or paranoia or bipolar disorder, or, other things that they could, having this form of, this derivative of Ibogaine would be helpful. It both gets them, free from their addiction, and it doesn't put them at risk for developing, like co-occurring mental health kind of problems as a result of doing Ibogaine. So there's definitely some good things there. There's another one called MC18, which is a derivative of Ibogaine that doesn't have any of the psychoactive, psychedelic side effects, is what they call them, side effects, profile, whatever you want to call it, but in the medical community, the hallucinogens are referred to as side effects. So it doesn't have the side effects that Ibogaine has. And those things are like approaching FDA approval. The timeline on that, I'm not 100% on, but they're in development. So, yeah.
And the people who come here, I think you were saying that, a goal is to get the secret sauce, to learn how to make the experience stick, and to have these experiences be effective in their long-term life. What are you seeing right now? I mean, how effective does the treatment plus the therapy seem to be for people who come here?
I don't want to put a number on it, because that's, it's pretty subjective. We also, we lean toward more of a harm reduction model. So what conventional rehab or treatment would consider successful recovery, it looks different for us. Like, for example, like someone going from a hardcore fentanyl addiction to smoking marijuana but holding, in a state where it's legal, and holding a job, and, and not being in the throes of opiate addiction, that could be a success story. So, those numbers, I mean, I can say it's much higher than the conventional model. The conventional model has a 7 to 10% success rate.
Wow.
And we are seeing much higher success rate than that, but I don't want to attach a number to it.
Yeah. Fair.
Yeah.
I know, I think Americans in the last few years have become more familiar with fentanyl and learning what that is and where it comes from and how dangerous it is. Do these treatments seem to work roughly equally well with fentanyl and just traditional opiates, or is there a difference in your mind between the two?
Fentanyl, it's a little bit different beast. Ibogaine does, there are people that definitely kick, a fentanyl addiction with Ibogaine. And, it's those people, when they come to our facility, they're the ones we need to take care of a little bit more. They need a little bit more TLC. But yeah, I mean, it's totally something that Ibogaine can handle. Like, as they develop these like carfentanil and these like stronger and stronger opiates, I think Ibogaine is going to start hitting a wall with that if they just keep on, developing stronger and stronger opiates. It does tend to, it's a little bit tougher with methadone, with fentanyl. It's doable, but it's just a little bit different process, and people just need a little more care afterward.
Last question I want to ask you. If there's somebody who's listening to this who fits the description, is interested in traveling to a country to do Ibogaine, is an addict themselves, and is interested in the services you provide here, what is the best way, or how would you recommend that they seek your facility out, seek you out? What are the steps that they might take to make that happen?
Well, they could, go to our website, it's rootrecovery.com. All of our contact information is there. If they were wanting to learn more about Ibogaine itself, I would recommend going to GITA.org. That's the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance, and that will, lead them in the right direction. It's a good place to start. It's a reliable, trustworthy source.
Lindsey, thank you so much for your time. This is fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.